Hello, this is another video in the series of public law revision videos that I have been preparing for all of you for your revision for the University of London exams. This will be on the chapter of House of Lords. Let me first address that. If you look at your subject guide, there is no chapter on House of Lords, correct? There is a chapter called the Salisbury Convention or something like that. Constitutional Conventions, a case study, that's what it's called. There is no chapter specifically on the House of Lords. Even when it comes to the chapter on the legislative process, even though we do learn the legislative process of the House of Commons and the House of Lords, there isn't any thing in the subject guide about the House of Lords specifically. As such, any question that comes out on the House of Lords and the questions that we are going to be doing today, in my opinion, are quite unfair because technically they don't fall within the syllabus. If we take the syllabus as defined by the subject guide that's been sent to you, unless I'm wrong, please correct me if I'm wrong, but there is no chapter on House of Lords. There is no notes on the House of Lords. But nevertheless, we have to deal with reality, and in reality, there are questions that come out on the House of Lords, and not just the legislative process. Even if they just asked on the legislative process, that would be fair because there is a chapter called Primary Legislation and Delegated Legislation, and so it can be part of that. But the questions seem to be asking on the composition of the House of Lords, reform of the House of Lords, and things like that, right? So that's my personal opinion. Like I said, however, since the examiners seem to be asking questions on the House of Lords, best that you be prepared as well. House of Lords questions don't come out so regularly, but when they do, they seem to be pretty predictable, right? So we're going to look at one of the House of Lords questions that has come out in 2019. By the way, for this video, there is no handout. My apologies, there's no handout for this. So just take down notes as I speak if you need to. We're going to look at the 2019 Zone A question. There was no House of Lords question in Zone B, unless you count the legislative process question that was question 3, Zone B. I have done this question in another video, right? The legislative process. Of course, when they talk about the legislative process of Parliament, you have to talk about the House of Commons and the House of Lords. So that's what I meant. That is part of the syllabus, no problems. That's part of the legislative process, right? But so Zone B, there was no specific question on the House of Lords. But if you take a look at Zone A, and if you take a look at Zone A, there was a very specific question on the House of Lords. And this comes under the category of what I describe as unfair, right? Anyway, that's just my opinion, right? If you look at 2019 Zone A question 6. 2019 Zone A question 6. Take a look at that question. A very interestingly worded question. I read it to you. If the House of Lords did not exist, it would have to be invented. Discuss the composition and powers of the House of Lords and make reform proposals. So I repeat, if the House of Lords did not exist, it would have to be invented. Discuss the composition and powers of the House of Lords and make reform proposals. So let's take the statement first, right? If the House of Lords did not exist, it would have to be invented. So obviously the statement is a very pro-House of Lords. The statement seems to suggest that the House of Lords plays an extremely important role. So the first thing is, do you agree with that? Based on what you've done, based on the reading that you've done and the study that you've done throughout the year, is that something you agree with? Now that would be the starting point of this essay. If you're going to attempt this essay, you must already have an opinion whether you are someone that believes that the House of Lords is good in its current state. So that's one opinion. Leave it the way it is. It's good in its current state. Or it's good but needs to be reformed, or there's no need for the House of Lords. There are many people who believe that as well. So there are three sort of angles or three general points of view with which you can take this essay, right? So I repeat, the House of Lords in its current composition, it's good, it's working, great. Or the House of Lords, but a reformed House of Lords. Maybe it becomes an elected House of Lords, or more power, right? Or no House of Lords at all. We just need a House of Commons, right? So those are the ways in which we will be possibly taking this answer. I, of course, will be taking it one way. You will see how I will go with it. But as usual, there are a variety of ways to do this. Please don't feel limited to any particular way. But importantly, you need to decide, right? You need to decide. You need to ensure that you are clear where you stand on this issue. Because if you don't take a clear stand, and this goes across the board for any chapter as well, if you don't take a clear stand, your answer will come out as waffling. You know what waffling means? Just here and there, there's no clear stand. Then you might end up just putting down facts as opposed to answering the question. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is a big sin, right? You need to answer the question. The facts must be worded in a way, the cases, the information, the examples need to be worded in a way that, answers the question. As basic as that sounds, it's very, very important, right? So, if the House of Lords did not exist, it would have to be invented. You probably should start off with describing a little bit, explaining about the House of Lords, right? So the House of Lords in the UK is the upper house of Parliament, right? What do I mean by upper house of Parliament? Effectively, the UK is what we call a bicameral legislature, bicameral legislature, bicameral. Now, what is a bicameral legislature? It just means that it is a legislature that is made up of two houses. So the UK is a classic bicameral legislature. It's the House of Commons, House of Lords. The US is the same, the House of Representatives and the Senate, right? Malaysia, two houses, right? Dewan Rakyat, Dewan Negara, right? Hong Kong, I believe, only has one legislature, so it's not bicameral. Anyway, so the House of Lords role is as a part of Parliament, right? Part of the bicameral legislature. So you've got the House of Commons, House of Lords. A few things you must note. You should compare and contrast with the House of Commons. The House of Lords is not an elected house. So that's the biggest difference that I think you need to highlight. The House of Lords is not an elected house. The House of Lords is a appointed house. Appointed by whom? Obviously appointed by the Queen on the advice of the Prime Minister. But it's not just the Prime Minister who decides who sits in the House of Lords. Membership of the House of Lords is quite varied. This is an important point to note as well, right? Membership of the House of Commons is purely by virtue of elections, right? You must have won your general elections and then you get a seat in the House of Commons. But membership of the House of Lords is by appointment, and the people who can appoint, political parties have a quota of appointments. So usually maybe senior politicians, former politicians, people who have been good to the party will get appointments to the House of Lords. Great. But the Queen can appoint people also who have done service to the country, who are not politicians, who have served the country well, who are perhaps leaders of their particular fields. So maybe the top scientist or the top sportsman, top architect of the country, whatever, right, can get an appointment to the House of Lords as a reward for their services, number one. But also for them to be able to bring in their expertise and bring in their skills to further enhance the level of debate or to further enhance the legislative process in the House of Lords. So it's a mutually beneficial thing, right? So number one, the House of Lords is appointed, not elected. That's very important. Number two, the types of people that sit in the House of Lords, they're called peers, right? They're all members of Parliament, yes, but usually they're called peers, right? There are many types of peers. There used to be these things called hereditary peers. These people called hereditary peers. Now, hereditary peers are peers that maybe a long time ago, someone was appointed to the House of Lords. The Queen appointed him to a House of Lords. Now, then, ever since then, his firstborn child will be able to take a place in the House of Lords. By no other reason, for no other merit, no other reason, purely for the fact that he was the firstborn child of a former lord, a hereditary peer, he will get a place in the House of Lords, the highest lawmaking body in the country. This seems like a very strange concept, isn't it, right? Especially for the rest of us that don't come from countries with this tradition. And yes, it is. It is a strange concept. And that is why a good thing, the House of Lords Act of 1999, the House of Lords Act of 99 removed the hereditary peers, right? Removed hereditary peers. Today, there are very, very few hereditary peers still surviving. All of them lost their positions by virtue of the Act. And that is something to be celebrated, to be honest. It makes the House of Lords more in line with what we understand a modern democratic legislature to be, right? So then there are life peers. So today, basically, all the peers are life peers. So you are appointed to the House of Lords. As soon as you are appointed to the House of Lords, you are there for life, right? Until you die, you are a peer. So these are life peers. So like I said, political parties can decide, both the government and the opposition, right? Civil society can nominate. So someone who's a leader of some NGO who's done very good things for the country can nominate some names, and the Queen will decide, right? The Queen and her body of advisors will decide who best to be in the House of Lords, right? Then there are Lords Spiritual. Lords Spiritual are leaders of the Church of England, right? Leaders of the Church of England, the bishops and archbishops of the Church of England are also automatically members of the House of Lords. And finally, there was a final category of lords called law lords. These were judges of the House of Lords in its judicial capacity. If you remember, a long time ago, well, not so long ago, but some time ago, the House of Lords had a legislative function, and then it also had a judicial function. The judicial function made it the highest appellate court of the land, called the House of Lords, obviously. But after the Constitutional Reform Act of 2005, the judicial power in the House of Lords was taken away, and the Supreme Court was created, right? And the Supreme Court replaced the House of Lords as the highest lawmaking body. What also this meant was these law lords, these judges who were also members of the House of Lords, they were called law lords, are now no longer members of the House of Lords. So law lords are no longer members of the House of Lords, right? So to quickly summarize, there are hereditary peers. Right now, there are extremely few hereditary peers, right? Because all of them were removed, or most of them were removed by virtue of the House of Lords Act of 1999. Then we've got life peers. These form the majority of the lords today. They are Lords Spiritual. And then there were law lords, but today there are no more. So you don't have to talk about them anymore, right? So this is a quick description of the House of Lords, right? They are the upper house. They are not elected. Who sits in the House of Lords, right? The House of Lords does have members of the government as well. By tradition, there will be at least a few members of the government who are from the House of Lords, so that they will represent the government in the House of Lords when it comes to answering questions and things like that. Okay, now, so after a brief description, so let's go back to the question, right? The question seems to suggest that, where's the question again? If the House of Lords did not exist, it would have to be invented. But the second half of the question seems to kind of limit our scope of discussion by saying that discuss the composition and powers of the Lords and make reform proposals, right? Discuss the composition and the powers. So these are the two aspects we are going to be talking about, the composition and the powers. And in light of these two aspects, is it true that the House of Lords is so important that if it did not exist, it would have to be invented? If it did not exist, it would have to be invented, right? So let's take a look at composition first, right? So effectively, the composition issue is always the fact that it is not an elected house. It is not an elected house. The fact that it's not an elected house, does this mean that the House of Lords is any less democratic, right? Does this mean the House of Lords is any less democratic, right? And then in terms of powers, we will be dealing with the powers also at the same time, right? In terms of powers, we look at the House of Lords having much less power than the House of Commons. Much less power than the House of Commons. Now, what do I mean by much less power? Number one, we need to talk about the Parliament Act. The Parliament Acts of 1911 and again 1949. Now, we've spoken about this in the context of other chapters as well, right? The Parliament Act of 1911 and 1949 together say that the House of Lords no longer has a veto power. What is a veto power? The House of Lords no longer has the power to kill off legislation. So if you were following me on the previous video that I did on the primary legislation chapter, right, and even during the lectures throughout the year, you will remember that any legislation must go through the House of Commons and then it must go through the House of Lords, right? Once the legislation has passed the entire process in the House of Commons, it will then go to the House of Lords. But the House of Lords, ladies and gentlemen, do not have the power during their second reading to kill the legislation. The best that they have is the power to delay legislation, right, or send it back. But if they send back a legislation, and let's say, for example, the House of Commons decides that they don't want to make any changes, the House of Lords doesn't have any power to do anything about it. Now, you contrast that with the House of Commons. The House of Commons has the power to kill legislation. Remember, during the second reading in the House of Commons, if a particular bill does not pass the vote, that bill is dead. This kind of power the House of Lords doesn't have, right? This kind of power the House of Lords doesn't have. So if that is the case, then how effective can the House of Lords be in its function of scrutinizing legislation or making law, right? Scrutinizing legislation, making law, also its function of keeping an eye on the government, isn't it, right? Can the House of Lords effectively be, can the House of Lords be effective, if it doesn't have as much power as the House of Commons, right? So you've got the Parliament Acts of 1911 and 1949. Then also, ladies and gentlemen, you have a whole bunch of conventions that govern the House of Lords as well. So, for example, one is the Salisbury-Addison Convention. This is a convention that you see in your subject guide, isn't it, right? The Salisbury Convention. The Salisbury Convention states that the House of Lords will not defeat or will not block, will not object to any legislation that is that is in fulfillment of the government's election manifesto. Okay, so let me explain that in a simpler term. If a particular government, when it was running for elections, promised certain things, so they've promised A, B, and C, then they won the election, right? So they formed the government. So when they have formed the government, if they are in the process of fulfilling their promises, meaning earlier when they were asking you for your vote, they said they will do A, B, and C. If right now they are actually wanting to do A, B, and C, the House of Lords will not block it. This is the Salisbury Convention, right? And so similar to that, there are some other conventions as well. And all these conventions, what they do is they seek to limit the power of the House of Lords. Now, why do we say limit the power of the House of Lords? Because a lot of people say that this limitation of power on the House of Lords is justifiable. Now, what do I mean by justifiable? It is justifiable because the House of Lords is not an elected house, right? When you are not an elected house, then the argument is you shouldn't have the same amount of power. So this is the justification for the House of Lords not having equal amount of power. In the relationship between the House of Commons and the House of Lords is clearly one of, if I may use the term, big brother, small brother, right? The big brother is the House of Commons, and the younger brother or the smaller brother is the House of Lords. The House of Commons is clearly the more powerful house. The House of Commons is clearly the most dominant house, right? So we've spoken about the Parliament Act, we've spoken about the conventions. We should also talk about the Parliament Act again, right? In the context of the Parliament Acts allow the House of Commons to entirely bypass the House of Lords. Now, this is shocking, isn't it, right? The House of Commons has the power today, as a result of the Parliament Acts, right, to skip the House of Lords if they wish. This was clearly seen when they passed the Hunting Act in 2004. The Hunting Act in 2004, the government of the day realized that the House of Lords was going to be very difficult. The House of Lords was going to oppose the passing of the Hunting Act, which was an act that was seeking to make fox hunting illegal, a terrible sport, fox hunting illegal. They foresaw that the House of Lords was going to make things very, very difficult. So what did they do? They employed the Parliament Act and they skipped the House of Lords entirely. This is allowed for, further underlining the fact that, look, the House of Lords has got much less power than the House of Commons. Okay, now why is this important? If we have decided and we've confirmed that the House of Lords does have much less power, then the issue here is, can the House of Lords in its current form be of any use? The question seems to suggest that the House of Lords, as it stands now, is so important that if it didn't exist, it would have to be invented. But having said that, we've seen that the House of Lords here is not a democratically elected body. It doesn't have the mandate of the people. That's in terms of its composition, right? In terms of its power, it's got far less power than the House of Commons. A lot of people argue that because it has far less power, the House of Commons pretty much can dominate the House of Lords. And so the House of Lords is not really very effective in its role to scrutinize the lawmaking process or also to scrutinize the government. So these are the issues, right? So this is the turning point in which your answer can go either way. Everything that we said so far are facts, but your opinion now comes in here. Is it true? Because now, if you were to say, oh, looking at the above, the fact that, look, they are undemocratic, um, they don't have enough power, the House of Lords doesn't seem to be extremely useful, then you will say that the statement is wrong. Maybe what we need is not a House of Lords, but maybe what we need is a US-style Senate. The Senate is the upper house in the American Congress, and they are very powerful, but they are also an elected house, you see? So that's the difference. But they are an extremely powerful body. And they do form a very good check and balance mechanism against the government and also in the legislative process. So maybe that's what we need. That's the issue in this question, right? Now, I am going to be taking a point of view that the House of Lords, the way it is good. Well, let's put it this way, it's good enough, right? The House of Lords, the way it is good enough. And that's the point of view that I will be taking for the purposes of answering this question. So far, let's not get confused, right? So far, we've given an introduction to the House of Lords. I've spoken about the composition of the House of Lords. I've explained who sits there. I've said that the House of Lords is an unelected house. And then I've also spoken about the powers of the House of Lords. The powers of the House of Lords in comparison to the House of Commons, much less. There are a lot of curtailments on the powers of the House of Lords, specifically, let's say, the Parliament Act. The Parliament Act, in terms that the House of Lords is no longer able to kill legislation. They can only delay legislation up to a maximum of a year. The Parliament Acts also, because the House of Commons can skip the House of Lords entirely if they wanted to. And then there are numerous conventions that exist in order to ensure that the House of Lords doesn't defeat the House of Commons, right? So, for example, the Salisbury Convention, right? So, why then am I going to be saying that the House of Lords is okay, right? So let's go with their first function first, in terms of reviewing legislation, right? So in terms of reviewing legislation, right, the House of Lords is uniquely suited to review legislation. Why? Because most of the members of the House of Lords don't have any governmental positions, number one, and all the members of the House of Lords are not going to be worried about re-election. Now, this is another major difference between the House of Commons and the House of Lords. Members of the House of Commons will constantly be concerned about re-election. Why? Because they are all politicians. So when you say being concerned about re-election, up to a year or two before an election, they already have to start being concerned about their constituencies. They have to be concerned about ensuring that their constituents still like them, visiting the constituencies, maybe making their presence felt, or even engaging in politics, making sure the political bosses of their parties will choose them to stand for elections. So this takes away their focus from what is the primary role of Parliament, which is to make law. Members of the House of Lords don't have to be so concerned about this. In fact, they don't have to be concerned about it at all. If you are appointed to the House of Lords, you are appointed for life. Today especially, right? You are appointed for life. Once you're in the House of Lords, your only concern, I suppose, would be to ensure that the laws that are made are good. So this is an important advantage of the House of Lords in its current state, the way it is. The fact that they are unelected, although you may argue that it's undemocratic and things like that, but the point is, the fact that they are unelected uniquely puts them in a position where they can truly focus on their lawmaking capacity, and they will not be so concerned about the opinions of the people. They will not be so concerned about doing the popular thing. Politicians have to do the popular thing, because if not, they will lose in the elections. The House of Lords or members of the House of Lords can sometimes make the tough decisions. Why? Because they don't have to worry about they don't have to worry about elections, ladies and gentlemen. They don't have to worry about elections, right? And a lot of members of the House of Lords are crossbenchers, right? CROSS, crossbenchers. Now, crossbenchers just mean that they are not belonging to any political party. Now, don't get me wrong. It is not to say that there is no political party ideology affiliation in the House of Lords. Not true. Many members of the House of Lords are former politicians, current politicians, or they profess loyalty to a particular political party. Many are. But also many are not. That's the point we're making. In the House of Commons, there will be very few truly independent members of Parliament. Very, very few. We're talking, I think, less than 20 out of 650 maybe, right? Because they all belong to some political party or another, whether big or small. But in the House of Lords, ladies and gentlemen, there are many, many more crossbenchers, which means that they will not be voting purely on instructions of their political parties. And this can only mean that this is a good thing, right? Now, this is something that doesn't exist in the US as well. I told you the US Senate is a political body, right? It's a powerful political body, but and they will usually be caught up by what their political parties tell them to do, right? For example, the impeachment of Trump, right? Look, I'm not a great fan of Trump, but there was no way he was going to be impeached. No way. But everybody, no way in the sense that they didn't have the votes in the Senate, right? Because the Republicans were the majority in the Senate, right? Despite your opinion or mine, or that Trump maybe should have been impeached, however, right? That let's not get political, right? But the point still remains that he would never have been impeached. Why? Because in the Senate, the majority in the Senate are from Donald Trump's political party, the Republicans. They would have voted according to what their political party told them, right? The majority at least. So this is something that in the House of Lords doesn't exist. The House of Lords, members of the House of Lords are more open to voting according to their conscience, and this is very good, right? And number two, there is a lot more experience. There's a lot more quality in the debates in the House of Commons, in the House of Lords. Sorry. Now, why do I say this? Remember, how are the members of the House of Lords? How do they become members of the House of Lords? They are appointed, right? And they are appointed on the basis that they are leaders, or they have contributed a lot to whatever field that they are in, which means the House of Lords will have scientists. The House of Lords will have medical practitioners who are leaders in their field. The House of Lords will have sportsmen, architects, musicians. These are all people that will probably not be in the House of Commons, because it is unlikely that a very, very successful businessman, let's say for example, will give up his business empire to become a politician. Not likely. A successful doctor, scientist will give up his career to become a politician. But they have so much skill and expertise that they can contribute as well, right? So when they are appointed to the House of Lords, this skills and expertise adds value. So ladies and gentlemen, this is another reason why the House of Lords in its current state is extremely valuable. It is widely regarded, and this is accepted view, this is not my opinion, it is a widely accepted view that the quality of debates in the House of Lords is much higher than the House of Commons. And the reason is simple. The people that sit in the House of Lords have a wider range of experience, the wider range of skills than the House of Commons. Now, let me remind everyone, in your writing, please make sure you don't write it as if, oh, House of Lords smart, House of Commons stupid. That's not what I'm saying. All I'm saying is the House of Lords has a much wider range of skills and expertise. In the House of Commons, they've all got skills and expertise as well, but it's usually the same type of skill and expertise, which is being a good politician. And that's not an easy thing to do, ladies and gentlemen, right? Being a good politician, you and I, unless you are a politician, I don't know, but I probably can't do that, right? It's a skill on its own, right? But the problem is the House of Commons is just full of people who are great politicians, maybe, right? But Parliament has to pass laws on such a wide range of areas as well. So the House of Lords definitely will be able to contribute towards the higher quality of legislation coming out, right? Next, number three. There are less procedural issues in the House of Lords. So once again, when we studied the lawmaking process, we would have learned about procedures to end debates, like the guillotine motion or the kangaroo motion, right? These are procedures that can be used to sort of terminate debates and committee proceedings if a vote is taken. In the House of Lords, there aren't any guillotine motions. They decide as a whole whether or not the debate has taken place properly. There is no procedure for the government to just say, look, that's it, we want to end this debate now, everybody vote. There is no such procedure, right? So that's good as well. So it also means that the government does not dominate proceedings, right? The fourth reason why the House of Lords is good is because what I just said, the government rarely is able to dominate the House of Lords because of the existence of crossbenchers, because of the existence of an almost equal number of members of the political parties, right? So the House of Lords is truly independent. For these reasons, ladies and gentlemen, it is seen that the House of Lords does provide value, right? Does provide value to the lawmaking process and to the scrutiny of the government, right? Because if let's say, for example, we made the House of Lords into an elected house, let's say, for example, which is one of the proposed reform. If we made the House of Lords into an elected house, then, ladies and gentlemen, what we will have is two houses of the exact same type of people, politicians. That's what we have in the US Senate right now. And as you can see, in the US Senate, there's too much politicking sometimes, right? Okay, not only that, the House of Lords is also good. So we've looked at it so far in terms of its composition, right? Who sits in the House of Lords, the type of people that sit in the House of Lords. But even in terms of its powers, and remember we spoke about its powers earlier, the limited power that the House of Lords has is not a bad thing, right? It's not a bad thing. Let me tell you why. The fact that the House of Lords has less power than the House of Commons just simply means that the legislative process will be a smoother process. It will mean that there will be no petty politicking that kind of stops important legislation from going through. Now, whenever I say that, the best example would be the United States, right? The current composition of the United States today, 2020, the House of Representatives is dominated by the Democrats. So the Speaker of the House of Representatives is Nancy Pelosi, a Democrat. And then the Senate is dominated by the Republicans, right? The Senate is dominated by the Republicans. Now, when you want to pass a piece of legislation in the US, you need the legislation to go through the House of Representatives, the Senate, and then the President needs to approve it. Can you imagine the chaos? Can you imagine the amount of problems that will happen if politicians decide to become very petty and reject pieces of legislation purely on the basis of politics? So this bill is coming from the House. It's coming from the Democrats. We in the Senate, we must reject it. This bill is coming from the Senate. It's coming from the Republicans. We in the House, we must reject it. Now, I understand that is a simplification. It's a very complex process. But the point I'm making is, as you can see, when both houses are of equal power, there can be a tremendous amount of fighting for the sake of fighting, right? The U.S. government, and I'm sure you've heard of this, the U.S. government has shut down many times. Can you imagine that? The government shutting down purely because the White House, the government, and the Congress, the House and the Senate, cannot agree on their budget. They've taken politics to new levels where the government has had to shut down, meaning they've got no more money to spend, or not no more money, but they cannot legally spend money because the budget has not been approved. And according to the Constitution, if the budget is not approved, any expenditure is illegal. This, ladies and gentlemen, is as a result, again, of toxic, petty politics. Now, in the UK, because the House of Lords has less power, because the House of Lords knows its place, this is unlikely to happen, right? Unlikely to happen. Because the House of Lords realizes that it is a supporting chamber. Its role is to support the House of Commons. And in that, when everybody understands their role that way, the legislative process becomes a smoother process for the benefit of the people, right? For the benefit of the people, because legislation then is passed faster, legislation is passed at a more faster rate so that it can benefit the people. Now, immediately, I'm sure a lot of people are saying, look, if it is easier to pass good law, then it will be easier to pass bad laws as well. You're right. That is an argument as well. But the fact that if we were to make everything so rigid and difficult in the hope that we will stop some fictional and imagined evil leader that is going to come, then until that day comes, that imagined evil leader who is coming to pass all these bad laws every day, the entire lawmaking process is going to be such a difficult process. And ladies and gentlemen, in the UK, the people are the ultimate arbiters. So let's say, for example, just because if the people believe that the House of Commons is abusing the House of Lords, and the House of Commons is just bulldozing through and making sure that all the bills that the government wants are being run through the House of Lords, or they are skipping the House of Lords on a very regular basis, the people of the UK are not going to sit down and take that, right? So the general elections, the people are the ultimate check and balance mechanism there as well, right? And as much as the House of Lords has significantly less power, ladies and gentlemen, it is a fact that, the Parliament Act, I told you, the fact that the Parliament, the House of Commons is able to skip the House of Lords entirely. That's only been used like 4 or 5 times since 1911. And the most recent time it was used is more than 15 years ago, which is 2004. It is not something that is used every day. Why? Because the government and the House of Commons realize that it doesn't look good. Further, if anyone were to argue that, the House of Lords as it stands today is just a toothless tiger, right? Able to shout but not do anything, right? That's also not true, right? That's also not true. The House of Lords has inflicted defeats on the House of Commons numerous times, right? Numerous times. Most recently, right, with regard to the Brexit votes, right? The Brexit votes. Remember when before Boris Johnson, when Theresa May was in power, in the 2017 to the 2019 sessions, right, when Theresa May was trying to pass the European Union notification of withdrawal bill, right, it lost in the House of Lords. It lost in the House of Commons as well, right, but it also lost in the House of Lords, right? So the House of Lords does, and this is not the only example, right? There are many other examples of how the House of Lords have defeated legislative proposals from the House of Commons. Now, a lot of you might be asking, but why should that be the case? If the House of Commons can just skip the House of Lords, then they could just do it, isn't it? The answer is yes, they could. But the reality is they won't, because it just makes them look bad. And the government is committed to the rule of law as well. So the House of Lords, even though it has this reduced power, or much less power than the House of Commons, does in fact play an effective role in the lawmaking process and the scrutiny of the government. It does. And as such, ladies and gentlemen, this comes back to our central point here, which is to say that, let's go back to the question. The question here is saying that if the House of Lords didn't exist, it would have to be invented, right? I believe this to be true, and that is what I will say. The House of Lords as it is today in the UK is unique in the sense that even with its undemocratic nature, even with its much reduced or much less power, it still is able to contribute to the lawmaking process and is able to contribute to the scrutiny of the executive in a meaningful way. And not only is it not to be seen as a disadvantage, the fact that it is an appointed house and the fact that it is a house with much less power than the House of Commons can be seen as an advantage, in fact, for the reasons why I've given above. Earlier. It can be seen as an advantage, right? Now, look, a lot of people will say it is anomalous. How can there be a part of Parliament, a supreme Parliament in the UK, where any act of the Supreme Parliament cannot be questioned by the courts, cannot be questioned by anyone. How can one half of this Parliament be unelected? Look, that is a fair point, right? Fair point. And I told you earlier, you can choose to say that the House of Lords is no good. And if you did say the House of Lords is no good, then I suppose you would address it by saying, number one, the very undemocratic nature of the House of Lords should be changed. How do we do that? We make it an elected house, or we make it a partially elected house. Now, in line with my view and in line with what I have been saying, my argument against that is, look, if we make it an elected house, and this has been proposed, by the way, by the Wakeham Commission report, and there have been multiple proposals. Nothing has happened, right? But there have been numerous proposals for reform to the House of Lords. If the House of Lords does become an elected house, we are going to lose so much of the House of Lords that makes it such a unique house, that makes it such an important part of the UK's constitution and system of government. We will lose that. We will lose the wide range of skills and experience and expertise that we have now because it is an appointed house. We will have another House of Commons, right? And if we have a separate election for the members of the House of Lords, the question is, what electoral system are we going to use? When are we going to have elections? It might happen if we have elections at different times than the House of Commons. It might happen that the House of Lords is dominated by one party and the House of Commons dominated by the other party. And then, ladies and gentlemen, what's going to happen is legislative gridlock. Legislative gridlock. It's a word that is unknown in English constitutional law, but it's very common in America. Because why? They fight. When each House of Parliament is controlled by a different political party, it's just going to be fights, right? So there's talk about reform to the powers of the House of Lords. Maybe the House of Lords should be given more power. The Parliament Act should be repealed, maybe. The Salisbury Convention should be removed. Yeah, well and fine. But again, if that happens, then we are then going back to having two houses that are of equal power, and it is my opinion that that is not something that is beneficial for the country. Right? It is certainly not something that is beneficial for the country. So in that sense, see, what I've done here is I started off with describing the House of Lords. I went into the powers and the composition of the House of Lords. And then I went to say that, look, despite the power and the composition of the House of Lords that maybe doesn't look so great, it's actually a good thing. But then I cannot not talk about the reform. So I've addressed the reform proposals, but I've also said that if we do have this reform that's been proposed, we are going to lose out on so much, right? So then my conclusion is that I agree with the statement, right? I agree with the statement. Definitely the House of Lords is important. If it did not exist, it would have to be invented. All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. Please email me if you have any further questions. All of you should know my email address, or you can get in touch with the Speed Office. I think this is the last of the videos that I will be doing for this year's revision. I just want to wish all of you good luck and do your exams well, right? Thank you.